Your Excellency, I want to ask you, as Minister of Culture for the UAE, and you've had a long history in the cultural sector, how governments can safeguard cultural identities at a time that we see more and more homogenization happening with identities?
That's a very big question for a very short session, I must say, but there's a lot that governments need to do, and there's a lot that we have been doing and taking action on. I think Her Highness Sheikha Latifa clearly outlined the importance of talent and the importance of people within this whole factor. So enabling talents and creatives is one of the most important factors that we should constantly talk about, even if this session is heavily about AI and about technology. But when you're talking about nurturing and safeguarding talent and culture, talent is at the forefront of this. I believe that governments need to empower the creatives. I believe that programs need to be put into place in order for talent to create culture and not entities to create culture. And I think, again, Sheikh Latif and I are very aligned when it comes to that ideology of giving the power for people to create their own culture. So governments need to enhance more programming when it comes to supporting talent, whether through grants, whether through ensuring the continuity of any kind of subsector when it comes to culture by providing the right policies, the right resources, financial or not financial. And also a very important factor is the continuation of private and public partnership in order to achieve and safeguard culture globally. Thank you.
You know, it's quite interesting because often people say identity, whereas in reality we hold many identities. And so this idea of being able to sit comfortably with these different identities, but also from a government perspective, here in the UAE, for example, we are a federal system. So you have your, large Emirati identity, then we have different entities, as we just heard from Her Highness Sheikha Latifa. She's the chairperson of Dubai Culture. We've got, of course, the same with DCT in Abu Dhabi and so forth, and of course Sharjah, importantly, with its creative sector. So how, again, as a government, do you think about these identities? And again, they're not just tied to our geographic presence. How do you see that, and how, again, can government help to foster those identities?
You know, Mina, we're extremely blessed to have that infrastructure put into place, and it didn't take overnight for this infrastructure to be put into place. I mean, some of the entities that you mentioned, such as Dubai Culture, Department of Culture and Tourism in Abu Dhabi, the Sharjah Art Foundation, they're more than what my hand can count in terms of fingers, but there's this existing framework that complements one another. So it makes our job at the ministry extremely easy in terms of streamlining what should the year look like, but also supporting where the talent needs support. So you have those entities, but you're missing the policies. You're missing the right policies in order to enable the creatives and enable those entities. And there's always the idea of the creative industries, and continuously measuring the creative industries is a very important factor for us. We're lucky that Dubai has their creative strategy agenda. Abu Dhabi does that as well. But on a national level, we oversee that, and we ensure that they all complement one each other, and it's all streamlined into a process that not only safeguards our culture, but also enhances it.
So, Ms. Jenkins, I want to turn to you, because we're speaking about governments harnessing talent, but at the same time, cultural identity. And of course, Spotify, it's an incredible platform to bring different voices. But there's also some concern. And so the concern is actually if algorithms are going to determine what I may listen to and therefore push me in a certain direction, are we in danger of taking away from some of the more distinct cultures that are out there?
It's a great question, Mina, and thank you all. This is my first time in the region. I have been so warmly welcomed. I'm so delighted to be here. Spotify truly believes we reflect culture, and so we have more than 600 million people all around the world using Spotify every single month. And when you look at what we do, we really try to reflect the individuals. We were speaking about this earlier. Her Highness was talking about that really the creators are the culture. And so I live in New York City, and I could walk in Times Square any day of the week, and I would see an Arab artist sitting up there from this region that we're highlighting. And so rather than dictating it by algorithms, what we seek to do is we couple humans with algorithms to get the best end result. And let me explain what I mean by that. So in this region locally, we have individuals who go all around and they're listening to talent. They're going to local establishments, they're going to schools and universities, they're listening to the talent, and they're trying to pluck at that talent and make sure that that talent gets an opportunity to be playlisted, to participate in our educational programs. And then what we all listen to, how we think about playlisting, that's matched along with that talent. And so it's not a single source, it's not just an algorithm. We really think about it as algatorial. But also what I would say is the beautiful thing about those algorithms is it helps me discover talent from this area. Because all of a sudden, because I've explored this genre or this genre of music, I get served up something really different. And so they actually play a very critical role in helping artists all around the world get discovered.
So you spoke about your team before you spoke about the algorithm.
Yes, people first, always.
So how do you, so if you were giving advice to, again, governments or people who are building strategies and systems, how do you make sure that people first remains a motto?
You know, it's a great question. And again, I appreciated the earlier comments because I do think there's a role for the government. But here's what I would say. First of all, it starts with collaboration. We're in this every day. We are talking to creators every day. We're seeing what resonates. And so we know probably better than anyone what's working and not working across the industry. It's not perfect. There's lots of opportunity. But anytime the government's looking at these issues, we'd love to be at the table so we can really help individuals who are writing policy understand the implications of that policy. The second thing I would say is about timeliness related to that. And so if you bring us in at the end, as anyone who works in a corporation knows, it's really hard because decisions have been made. And so I think if you bring us in at the beginning, we can really seek to help inform about what we know. And then last but not least, this space is changing so fast. I look at this every day. I'm working on this day in and day out. I'm actually meeting with governments around the world on a regular basis. And everyone is seeking to write really strong policy, but you must be nimble because what AI looks like today, it's gonna look really different than that in 3 months and 6 months, and imagine a year. Think about how much the world has changed. And so the ability to be very nimble and flexible, I think is quite critical to ensure future opportunity is not lost. Because one of the things I've appreciated in being here is you seek that. It's so much the core of who you are, and it's something I'm very proud to see as I've spent time in the region.
Your Excellency, I want to ask you about that point, because this idea of you have to put regulations, you have to think about changes that are happening, but then how do you stay nimble enough to shift when you see that certain changes are taking a breath?
I think, Mina, specifically within this sector, agility is very important, and moving from something to another is really crucial. I was grateful to have a conversation with Dusty just before this session, and we're already going to cook a few things in the kitchen together, but I think it's the private-public partnership is really heavily influenced in decision-making, in policy-making. The music industry, for example, there's a lot that we could learn from Spotify and what they're looking at in Spotify, not only from the tech side of things, but also from the policy side of things, because I know Dusty has a lot of conversations with global leaders when it comes to IP rights, when it comes to the need to sustain and enhance talent, and of course the tricky question of AI and how does that feed into the whole subsector. So in order to be agile, conversations need to happen, and conversations with the private sector is really crucial for any government.
And how do you see that platform for these conversations? Because again, the journalist in me says it's great, we're all going to say we want to work together, but then how do you enable it, and how do you make sure trust is built where you know who you can trust getting that advice from or building those relationships from your experience speaking to different governments?
Yeah, it's a fair question, and I think I just would step back and talk about who Spotify is at its core, because I think it really speaks to how important this issue is to us. And so for those that may be less familiar, Spotify was established 17 years ago, and essentially to take you back in time, the music industry was in an absolute free fall. Piracy had taken over, and so people were basically just taking the content. They were taking it for free. And the founder of Spotify looked at this situation. He had a conversation with a friend, and he said, there has to be a better way. But how do you convince someone to pay for something that they can get for free? Well, you have to make it so exceptional. And so at that moment in time, we put a stake in the ground. We said we wanted to enable creators to live off of their art. That's why we were established. And so that sits on every wall in every Spotify office, but at a lot of companies, they have mottos, and they don't really mean them. And we mean it every day. As an executive team, we talk every day about what we did today to help creators. And so really when we come to the table, of course there are benefits to Spotify, but our agenda is not ourselves. It's that motto. It is really to enable creators. And because we're sitting with them each and every day, I think we have a keen sense of what's working and not working. We essentially pay out 70% of everything we make to rights holders. And so that goes into how our company's been set up from the very beginning. That was $9 billion in 2023. Again, remember the industry was in a free fall. So when it comes to policy, our goal is really to say, here are the watch-outs. Again, it's not always going to be perfect, but we want to work toward the common good. We believe feedback should be ongoing on both sides. And when there is an opportunity to have this real, honest dialogue, I think you can get into it. AI is one of those issues lots of people are talking about right now.
So, Sheikh Salim, if I can ask you to that point about enabling creators, again, the UAE, several other governments, of course, but the UAE has really put creative industry as at the heart of its diversification and thinking about its long-term goals. So when you come to it and think about how do we harness talent, how do we enable creators, while at the same time not making them too dependent on what the government might do, how do you do that?
Very good question. I mean, I think it's a large factor of things. I think financial support is something that a lot of governments have not been talking about when it comes to the creative sector. So what we focused on is we started off with a pilot project of announcing a national grant program for a list of different items that creatives need in order to finish their cultural product or export it or finalize their main idea. So a lot of people think that the financial aspect is not that important and that it's heavily policy-based. But I think it's a mix of policies, it's a mix of financial support, and I think a very important factor, Mina, is education, arts and culture education. In fact, tomorrow we're hosting the UNESCO Conference on Arts and Cultural Education in Abu Dhabi, same time as the government summit, oddly enough, but we have around 90 ministers of culture and education coming together and sitting on a table together to revamp the framework when it comes to arts and culture education. Everything starts from education. Once you have an education, the right backbone of education and a right government that's disseminated globally, digitally, then you have the right people at the conversation to actually implement those policies and to look at the kind of support that we like to provide.
So that international aspect, again, Spotify Global speaks, different languages in that sense, yes, so to speak. How do you make sure that there is standardization, and that's something we spoke about also in the other, in the previous panel, this idea of standardization and learning from one another, while again maintaining the different aspects or the different approaches that creators might take?
Yeah, so here locally, we established our office 5 years ago in this region, and initially it was really focused on being a regional hub. But what's happened is, as Spotify has really embraced this idea of work from anywhere, lots of people are choosing Dubai. Go figure. I'm not surprised by this, having spent some time here. But essentially what we're doing is sharing those learnings and best practices as a global team constantly. And the more you get global talent in the region, the more they're able to infuse those learnings. And there are certain best practices. For example, we have programs called Equal and Radar, which are solely focused on finding that up-and-coming talent and giving them education, resources, support marketing dollars so that we can showcase them on the world's global stage. And then again, I do think one of the beautiful things that we're seeing as you look at Arab music throughout the world, in the last year, this is just in the last year, we've seen a 40% increase in the listening of music from this region. That's on top of the year before, which was also 40%. This is the 5th year running that we're over 40%. So you think about it, you go back to 2018, we were in a very different place than we are today. And so it truly is what you're seeing now is like genres are blending, and we are all listening to different types of music today. And I think initially there was some concern that it would be Western music, but it's actually the opposite. We really are creating these super highways all around the world to be able to promote that talent. And then again, sharing global learning so that everyone gets to benefit.
It's a really good point about this concern that one genre or one, be it Western or otherwise, would dominate. And at the same time, Sheikh Salim, for you, when you're thinking about cultural identities, when you're thinking about promoting culture, technology can enable that. But at the same time, how do you make sure you have the right infrastructure to get those voices and to get, again, be it Emirati, be it Arab, from the region out there?
I think, you need to have the right plan set in place. And as I mentioned, we have the right infrastructure, and we are blessed that there's different entities coming up with their own creative industry strategies. Again, Her Highness Sheikh Latif spoke about the importance of data, which is crucial to measuring the creative economy. But then when you hear Dusty talk about 40% increase in a few number of years, it's a significant jump in the music industry. So we see that the creative industry is flourishing in all its different subsectors. And the question is, how do you regulate it, and how, more importantly, do you protect the rights of those creatives through the right IP programs? So we're working currently with the Ministry of Economy in order of creating the right CMOs for every single subsector for IP rights for creatives. And again, this conversation will not go forward if I don't have continuous conversations with people such as Dusty, who's in the industry every day, day to day, seeing it grow. And it's not a once every year conversation that we should be having. It's at a much faster pace than we could ever expect.
That's really interesting, the point of the continuous conversation, and again, how those conversations are taking place. But Ms. Jenkins, I want to go back to a point you raised, which is about your team. You said we opened an office in the region. And something that Sheikh Salim and I were talking about when I was asking about the ministry, he said, Mina, culture is not created by the ministry, it's created by people. The ministry is there and so forth, that's our framework, but it's people. And I wanted to bring that to you about this idea of your people. How do you make sure that they are continuously learning at a time when the industry is changing, when technologies are changing and so forth? How do you implement that internally? And again, what would you tell government officials that they could do for their own people?
I do think for us it really starts with that North Star of what we're here for, and that is, as I said, to help artists live off of their art, whether that's a podcaster, a musician of any kind. And so when you start from that, we want our team to feel that at their core. So we talk about that day in and day out, and we're really measuring success based on that very principle. What have we done for the creator today? And then on top of that, we're really looking to reflect culture. We want our people in the community. We want them experiencing the talent. We want them to understand the local nuances. We want them to know the officials. And this is a very thoughtful group of people here. And so what's great for us is you want the same things. And so our interests are very naturally aligned. Spotify looks for the best talent out there, and I feel really fortunate that we've got some really incredible people. I learn from them day in and day out. But I do think part of the reason we're able to recruit them is because it's such an exciting place to work. I mean, who wouldn't want to work with music and artists and technology sort of day in and day out?
So your job's easier than some of us.
I don't know. This government is one that is definitely seeking to find solutions and to enable.
Yeah.
It is a challenge. I'm working with governments around the world trying to explain streaming and the complexities of the industry and how it's growing. And I think the principles that you have of ensuring that you're continuing to enable the growth, it's so important, because when you start there, you really start from such a healthy place. Instead of, how do we create just more rules? It's how do you help it flourish with the right rules? And I really appreciate that.
So we are ending on rules, and our next session, I will ask you to please kindly remain seated as we think our panel is going to talk about rules, creativity, but also AI and less of the human, which was the focus of this session. So thank you both to my great panel, Sheikh Salem and Dusty Jenkins. Thank you so much.